All right, welcome back, everybody. It is Monday night. You are watching the IDP Heat Seekers. I am your host, as always, Brad Menendez, with my usual suspects, Craig Reith and Paul Veldboom. Craig, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Overly exciting day. It wasn't a pain in the butt sort of day for me. It just was a normal relaxed Monday, which are uncommon these days. So it was noteworthy in that regard, I suppose. How are you?
It was my Monday was more closely affiliated to Paul's Monday, which was rough. In my world, I am a project manager, and we had a project go live over the weekend, so I worked most of the weekend, and then still had things to do Monday morning to wrap it up, and people were getting crazy and annoying, and especially because it was a project with our finance team, and those folks are, finance people are awesome. Paul, how are you?
The weekend was pretty fun. Yeah, today's work was just makes you want to hit somebody. Just was not fun. I'll just leave it there. Hopefully we can slay some fools later on and be good with it.
Take your aggression out on the kids in their basements. Got it.
That's right.
Yeah, tonight's episode is going to be fun. It's a little bit more laid back. We're going to be doing questions. We got some Q&A from the community, and it'll be fun to answer the things that they've been asking about. We're also going to do just kind of a couple of about us type questions to give you guys a better feel for us, especially those of you that subscribe to and listen to the pod. Give you a little bit of a vibe of who we are. Kind of our fantasy makeup and things like that. So it'll be a fun night. We've got some questions, and as always, if you have questions, make sure you post them in the chats. We will answer them live on the air Monday nights, and then obviously on the pod whenever you listen to it. So, but we're going to hit it hard tonight with a ton of news. So we're in training camp. We're starting to see pads on players, guys getting knocked around, and unfortunately, guys getting knocked around means some of those guys tore ACLs and ruptured tendons and all sorts of stuff. IDP wise, I don't necessarily know how relevant he is anymore in IDP, but Gerald McCoy is our first guy. He's down for the season, confirmed. Gentlemen, do you have any feelings one way or the other about McCoy, especially in defensive tackle specific leagues? Is there anything you want to add to his injury? Craig, how about you, buddy?
If you have to start more than one specific defensive tackle in a league, I think he'd be a fine DT2 to start. Not a lot of leagues like that. He's not overly relevant for most of them. It's going to hurt the Cowboys more. They had more or less a sort of veteran line there now with what's going to be Poe, Griffin, Lawrence, and McCoy probably as their starting four. And McCoy was a solid veteran that was able to contribute last year. He wasn't as splashy as he was younger in Tampa. So fantasy-wise, not as many implications as real life.
Paul?
Yeah, I think the same thing. If you have odd leagues, he's just out. I think it affects Lawrence and Quinn more from an actual or no.
Griffin.
Griffin. Griffin. It affects them more from an actual football perspective. But fantasy wise, there's not many leagues that play that deep. It's where he's relevant. He's releasable almost in even deeper defensive tackle leagues at this age and injury history, and he's releasable
for sure. Yeah, he's not a guy that I was jumping all on board either. I mean, I've never been a huge McCoy fan, even when he was semi-fantasy relevant. But there are situations where I've had to spot start him back in the day. So, there's a report out that Melvin Ingram is sitting out because of his contract. This one's a little more fantasy relevant. Melvin Ingram is a guy that people were playing and starting on a regular basis. Are you guys concerned about this? Paul, and I'll kick it back to you first.
I try not to worry myself with contracts just as a general. I know every. I'm an FSU fan. I own Cook in lots of leagues. every Alexander Madison owner was just hitting me up. Hey, what are you gonna give me? And my answer was a very stern. No thanks, I'm not concerned. You hardly ever see contract holdouts into the season where they last more than 2, 3, 4 weeks. I'm just not concerned about it. It's not something that you can, you know, concern yourself with. If it happens, it happens. I understand it. He's got a family, and he'll make the best decision for him, hopefully. But that being said, it is the Chargers, and they let Gordon walk. That was probably smart, but it's the same. It's the same money tight team there. Am I concerned? No, but I'm just never concerned about defense. Kraig?
I don't tend to concern myself as much with the holdouts either. What I will say is, in terms of fantasy relevance, like Brad said, he is more fantasy relevant. He was, I believe, like our D-line 20 last year in terms of scoring, which is, for most leagues, if you're looking at 10 or 12 teams, I believe like our D-line 20 last year in terms of scoring, which is, for most leagues, if you're looking at 10 or 12 teams, you're looking back end of a 2, probably top of a 3, and I don't have much of a reason to think that he'd be anything greater than that or anything much lower than that if he was healthy. They've gotten some help in their linebackers with Murray that we talked about, but it's basically the same sort of thing. They have Joseph there instead of the D tackles that they had last year, but it's no major changes in my mind. It's him and Bosa on the defensive line that you'd be looking at. Bosa's the main guy. And if you have Ingram as your second or third defensive line, you're probably all right with it. It's nothing long-term going to be amazing, but for a season, it'd get you by.
Absolutely. Yeah, Ingram's a guy that I would have been trying to sell anyway. Even before this, I'm just not a huge fan of his IDP prospects, and I haven't been for basically since Bosa came to town. He's kind of the edge I would have wanted there. The Jaguars lost a couple of depth pieces in Aaron Lynch retiring, and then I can't think of the other guy's name, but
Javon Hargrove.
Oh, is it Hargrove? Okay.
No, it was Gunter.
Oh, Rodney Gunter, yes.
Gunter.
Yep. So,
but Hargrove might have been earlier.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Hargrove was on the Eagles. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the Jaguars keep losing defensive linemen, which will mean more snaps for guys like Josh Allen and Taven Bryan, and these guys are going to get a ton of playing time because there's just not a lot of options. So that could be good, could be bad. I like Allen a lot. Bryan hasn't really developed much since coming into the league, but.
I think this matters if you're looking, and we don't touch on it a whole lot, but if you do team defenses, you weren't targeting the Jaguars as one of those teams, I got to get them anyway. But this is just further depletion of their defensive line. You alluded to the point, these aren't guys who are going to be starting anyway. But it does matter for team depth and what the team had planned for the season. This is the third and fourth guy that they've lost. They lost 2 to the COVID opt-outs that they had planned on having here. Now they have 2 that are retiring. So for their plan and what they had set up going into the season, whatever that was going to be, it causes them problems, which to me just furthers them as a target, someone you'd want to target going against in fantasy as far as playing guys, but also just even furthers them as someone that should remain on your team defense waiver wires if you have them all season, because I don't see them being someone you'd want to play.
Yeah, the Jaguars are a bit scary. Paul, what's your take on this defense?
I remember Lynch when he was at Notre Dame, and I remember he was one of those elite of the elite high school kids. If you would have said that he would have gotten one decent season in the NFL and the rest were just horrible, I would have looked at you dumbfounded. I think that, when they signed Jernigan, national champion Seminole, that I think that's a solid sign. I know he's got health issues, but Houston offered him $4 million before they looked at him. So maybe the Jaguars think he still has something. He's a local guy from that area. I think he grew up half an hour from the stadium or something. Lake City, I think he was from. He's a solid sign. I know Brian is not what what they were hoping for. I still think they're better than what maybe you're giving them credit for, but it's basically Josh Allen on the D line,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. There's just, I mean, he's got elite of the elite upside, but as a team, yes, I would leave the defense on the wire unless they're playing the Jets or something.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at a team defense, you have to think what kind of turnovers and what kind of action you're going to get on them on a week to week basis, and it's going to be hard to get consistency out of these guys. And because of that, I would look elsewhere, especially because most of your leagues that would use a team defense are probably like 12 team leagues, and there's going to be plenty of defenses out there that you can grab, and you play the matchups. I mean, I don't think I've ever drafted a defense before the second to last round in the last 5 to 10 years. Because I know I'm going to drop them within a week or two and grab whatever is the new hotness. So, from an individual player perspective, Josh Allen's the guy to have. Some of the linebackers will give you some production this year, and then some of the secondary will give you production because they're going to get thrown out a bunch. I mean, some of your younger guys and your rookies and things like that.
Yeah.
Looking through the. Oh, go ahead, Craig. You got anything else?
Just agreeing with you. I mean, we talked about it last week. That secondary, who they signed was it Brock, because Rashard Melvin went out and he was the only veteran really in that secondary. So you're going to have a relatively younger, inexperienced defensive line, unless for some reason Ngakoue has a change of heart and comes back and wants to play with them. So a young defensive line, a couple linebackers, and not much in the secondary at all. It's just a recipe for problems in team defense.
For sure, and it's going to be an interesting season for the Jaguars. I feel like they're going to be taking a lot of lumps. They're trying to transform this thing, and they're going through a ton of changes, and it'll be interesting. I know from an injury perspective, I know Trey Waynes also got hurt. He's going to miss most of the season with surgery, the Bengals corner. So there were times where he was fantasy relevant because people like to throw at him, but he hasn't really been terribly fantasy relevant much of his career. We've seen some other things like Jaleel Adday worked out with the Vikings. So there's some other little things, but nothing terribly fantasy relevant. Were there any other news and notes you guys wanted to talk about? I know we obviously on the offensive side have lots of things going on, from the Jalen Hurd injury to the Des Bryant working out for the Ravens. I mean, there's things happening on the offensive side, but from the defensive side, there's just not a lot going on.
Besides Hargrove, but he said he's going to be out a couple weeks. Trey Waynes being hurt is the same as if he's out there. He's completely useless.
The only other one that made any sort of impact in my brain in any sort of major way was just looking further down the road, because I'm in that mindset with COVID going on with all my teams. Alford on the Cardinals had the same thing. I think he tore his pec, and he's out most of the year. They're thinking he's a cornerback, so again, they're not that important, but they don't have a whole lot of secondary depth there with the Cardinals. And we know that offense is going to want to throw, and if they have another injury or people get sick or something, I mean, that's potentially going to be another defense that gives up a lot of points where people were hoping they were going to be turning it around this year. So, and in regards to rookies with Simmons, I know they said they're going to stick with him at linebacker, and I think that's a good plan. But sometimes when you get into the thick of it, your best laid plans get shot to heck, and you got to, change things on the fly. So, another example, you might see Simmons, this is just speculation, but bad stuff starts happening in that secondary down the road, something to look out for. The dual positionality, in theory, he could be huge if he had that as a defensive back.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's so talented and so versatile that he could play at any of those positions. We saw it in college. So I think that's only more helpful for him, because then he's going to be on the field more, getting a little bit more action, and that should lead to better fantasy production.
Also with Simmons, if you can handle the swings, and he becomes safety eligible, you're potentially looking at a top 3 or 4 undisputed safety, and that's some fairly serious upside. I know he's got solid upside as a backer, but safety, it's a thinner position. It'd be like saying, hey, your decent receiver is now tight end eligible for an offensive side.
Mm-hmm.
If he becomes safety eligible, you've hit a home run.
Oh, absolutely. It'd be interesting to see how that develops throughout the training camp and into the season. I don't know that any of the sites are really going to move him to safety eligible as well, but if they do, that's huge. All right, so that's most of the news and notes, most of the fantasy relevant news and notes. So tonight, like I said, we're doing Q&As. We have about 5 or 6 questions from the community that we thought would be really good to bring up and chat about. And then I also wanted to include a couple of, kind of get to know us ones. You've seen me on Roto Heat and on the different streams forever, but Kraig and Paul not so much. So I want to make sure that you guys get to know these guys a little bit more. Maybe depending, we're not going to go too deep because we don't want full Paul. We never go full Paul, but we want to get out there and have a little fun and just kind of liven the show up a little bit. We've been hitting our top lists and talking about different players and different things over the last few months, so we figured we'd bring it back down a little bit and help you get to know us. So first and foremost, before we get to the IDP related questions, we'll start with you, Paul. So outside of fantasy football, talk about who you are, what you do, and then give us a little bit of your fantasy football experience, how long you've been playing, when you do IDP, things like that.
Okay. General interests. If you want to hop on COD here tonight or tomorrow night, hit me up. Send me a message. We can certainly play. And the reason that's been put on is because Fridays used to be golfing, and now it's in the office because #essential. I am almost a scratch golfer. On Friday, we had a scramble. We took first, and it was me holing out from 40 out to win the scramble. No, I've been playing fantasy football ever since 04, ever since I met Kraig. We played down in Lee Hall down in 04, and my first ever selection was Clinton Portis, and it didn't work out. Started playing keeper probably 05, 06, 07, somewhere in there. First started playing Dynasty in 2010, and then ever since then it's add this to it, add Devi, tune in Thursdays for that. Shameless plug, I know. But yeah, it's just a lot of watching football, hitting up the office. I trade stocks. I can't say I'm the most knowledgeable on that, but I have knowledge on that. Wednesday nights I do poker league, although not right now because it's older folks and some of them are in the high risk, but that's a different story. But yeah, that is me. Kraig?
Yeah, I've been playing fantasy football since 2001. And for a lot of you weren't playing back then necessarily, I'm going to read some of these names off to you in the order that I took them. It wasn't that big of a league. It was a work league. But it was 10 teams. I had Falk, Brian Greasy, Matt Stover, Miami's defense, Charlie Garner, Joe Horn, Mushin Mohammed, Orande Gadsden, Jeff Thomason, Jeff George, Casey's defense, Jeff Hall, got to get those 2 kickers right away, Terry Allen, Hines Ward, and Johnny Morton. So that'll give you some of the names that I had fun with back then. And like Paul said, I started playing with him I don't think I was in the first year. I think it was 2005 looking back at it. But either way, 2004, 2005, we became a keeper league a few years after. He started his dynasty league in 2010. The main league that Paul and I discussed started in 2012, which was my introduction to IDP. And then I think it was 2 or 3 years ago now. It seems like yesterday, but that's what 2020 does to your brain, that I started Devi. So it's a few years anyway.
That's awesome.
I don't do a whole lot of leagues outside of actually having IDP. It's generally when I'm roped into something out of people guilt tripping me that I'll take a team defense, because if I have my druthers, we'd banish them all. But it's not everyone's cup of tea, just like kickers. Paul and I even had a league where we had punters for a season. So, I mean, other leagues do exist. Personal life, I'm not practicing out on my own or anything as an attorney, but I am a licensed attorney in the state of Wisconsin. I work for an insurance company dealing with auto and homeowner claims, so I have all sorts of fun with that. 4 kids at the house, the dog and cat, keep me busy. Doing what I can to keep the house running and kids alive. But beyond that, boy, I like to sleep when I can. I'm into Pokemon Go, so if you want to be my son's Pokemon Go friend, because he has us playing all the time, we're doing that, and I know more about Pokemon now than I did when I was his age. So that'll tell you the sort of things. Legos, we have probably millions of Legos in our basement. So that is fun to walk over in the middle of the night. But yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of hobbies, to be honest. I mean, it's kids, fantasy football when I can get around to it, and that's generally it.
Understandable. Yeah, kids change the dynamics considerably. I've got an 8-year-old and a soon-to-be 6-year-old, and I've since having children have become a dance mom, dad, if you will. So I sit at dance class and I cheer them on and I help them learn their moves. I am a terrible dancer, so it's more explaining than showing. So I know the feeling. With kids, things change everything. And even today, on the ride to school, we're listening to like the Greatest Showman soundtrack. Like I never would have thought in a million years that I'd be listening to all these movie soundtracks of like poppy dance kid songs and things like that, and it just cracks me up because then throughout the day I know them all. It's like I'm just kind of going through my head and all that. Typically I'm a rocker. I listen to heavier stuff. So it always cracks me up.
So you're saying that's a future Patreon level reward, is you showing off your dance moves?
I'm okay with that. Rotoheat.com/Patreon. You definitely, if you provide enough of those greenbacks, I will dance.
There we go, people.
You can make this guy dance for money. That just doesn't sound right. So, needless to say, it's fun. I mean, not only being a dad, but I've been doing fantasy football since '99. So all my leagues for a while there were on pen and paper. Like we'd meet up at Buffalo Wild Wings for a draft, and I would write it all down and have to keep track of it. And each week, guys would call in, and I would talk the scores and give everyone their stats and all that. I mean, it was terrible. Looking back, like I certainly appreciate the sleepers of the world and the MFLs and things like that. And it's just so much more.
I heard you that.
My wife heard me say dance for money, so now she's dropping.
Look at some money.
Oh boy!
She's bringing the Lincolns into the picture.
Don't get us banned from YouTube now that we're
I'm telling
on
you.
there.
She's a bad influence, is what I'm hearing. So I've been doing it back since, and I pulled up my first league on MFL. 2006 was when I took my home league to MFL. And I'll just name off some of these gems. My starting quarterbacks were Mark Bulger and Chad Pennington. But I also had Tavares Jackson as a young player. I had Dominic Davis at running back, but Brian Westbrook was my only real running back. Hank Baskett, Deion Branch, Isaac Bruce, Plaxico Burress, Reggie Wayne, Maurice Stovall when he was a thing. Robert Ferguson for you Packer fans. He was on my roster. My starting tight end was Jeremy Stevens. And then, we have kickers and deep. So my home league has not come into the new decades. We still do kickers and defense. But in 2006, my defenses were Cincinnati, Minnesota, and I had John Carney and Steven Goskowski. So that'll tell you everything you need to know about 2006 for my team, which was not great. Did not go well for them. So
They
it's
didn't select Jamarcus first overall in 07 like the Raiders did.
oh dear sweet heavens no. No, I think I actually punted that pick. If I remember correctly, like I'm a guy that most years I don't have a first round pick until we get to the draft and then I trade for somebody's first round pick. Like this year I didn't have a first round pick in this league and then around pick 13 because it's a 16 team league, around pick 13 I was like, "You know what? I think I want this pick." And then a guy called me and said, "Hey, I want Rieger." Uh, and I'm pretty sure he's going to go here. I was like, well, yeah, pick 13. I was thinking about it because this league draft's crazy. I mean, like it's a rookie and free agent draft because we don't do waivers throughout the year because it's 16 teams and you want to have somebody to draft. I wound up going. I traded for the pick and then immediately traded down and sold Jalen Rieger for multiple picks. So it was pretty funny. I'm a guy that comes into drafts and I trade my picks. I'm okay with it. It doesn't bother me. I know that I'll always get some later.
Yep.
So, needless to say, that was that. IDP I've been doing for it feels like about 10 years now. I think it's probably pretty close to when I started doing IDP. The most recent edition of that was 2016. So.
Yeah. All right in that same range, it seems like.
Jaws. Sounds like you had a longer relationship with Hank Basket than Kendra. Yeah, that's probably true. Burn. Hank Basket, if you're watching.
If you're listening, sorry, Hank. Yeah.
All right. So, that being said, you can find all of us on the Roto Heat community. We are active in Facebook, in Discord. You want to chat with us, feel free to shoot us messages. We love to shoot the breeze and talk fantasy with you. So now, on to the IDP side of things. First question, and it's kind of a mixed bag of random guys, but Rich over in the Facebook community asked, are Logan Ryan, Eric Reed, and Jadeveon Clowney worth rostering? And I'll start with you, Paul.
I'm really glad that in the little sheet before the show, you put that it's one defensive line and one for all the others and one flex. In that one, the only one I would consider right now is Ryan. Clowney is almost not ownable unless you're playing deeper. I'm surprised he hasn't been signed yet. I'm surprised he's still holding out for money. Reed is the same way. Reed has more upside just because he's a below average player right now, so he gets thrown at a lot. But Ryan's the only one I would consider owning, and if he's not signed by September 1st, the bag might be out of air on that one as well.
What about you, Kraig?
In a league like Paul read off of those, 12 teams and those starting requirements, I don't see, I guess, the value in holding on to any of them. The leagues aren't deep enough to be hanging on to guys that aren't signed at this point, to me. You don't know where they're going to go, and that can matter a lot. Reed's season was made by where he went last year and the fact that they had all those opportunities and he was thrown at that much. If he had gone to a situation like Green Bay where he's a backup and you were holding on to him or something, you're not going to get anything close to that. So right now you're putting out a hope and a prayer that these guys land somewhere where they're going to be relevant, but there's other people in a league that size with just those requirements that you could find that you're going to have more assured production out of, barring injury, but that's for everyone.
Yeah. For me, when I saw the question, I was like, yeah, I'm leaving these guys on the free agent market. Now, Ryan and Reed, I think, are kind of priority watches. So if you're on like NFL, I'd put them on my watch list because what's going to happen is those two guys, if they go somewhere to a team that they are getting significant playing time, they're definitely serviceable players. Like I have no problem. Eric Reed was a guy that I played in some of my leagues last year on a regular basis when he was in Carolina because he had value. So, but yeah, I'm leaving all those guys on the free agent wire. So next question. So Charles over on YouTube wants to know top 3 rookie linebackers not named Queen and Simmons. I'll start with you, Kraig, this time.
Well, I mean, Murray, whether we're talking redraft or dynasty, I mean, Murray's right up there for me. The other one, there's a lot that has to play out because most of the other guys, once you go down the list, aren't guaranteed to be starters. Willie Gay, I really like. He's probably in the top three after those two either way. And then it's sort of who else do you want to, hang your hat on going forward. For Dynasty, it probably would be, we've talked about him a lot here, Jordan Brooks. And if you're talking redraft, I mean, kind of take your pick. There's guys in, not St. Louis, the Los Angeles Rams. There's guys in Cleveland. There's guys in Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
Any one of those battles, or even we talked about some last week and a few weeks ago, Philadelphia. I mean, you could have some rookies that go into starting spots that are going to get production. So for redraft, it's really just see how these things go in training camp and the start of the season and who do you have a chance to grab. But there's not a whole lot of rookie linebackers besides the ones that we talked about are on his list that have that what appears to be immediate shot at playing time.
Paul?
I'm going to somewhat ignore the question because I'm just going to list my top 5 overall. From a dynasty perspective, it's either Simmons or Murray, number 1. I still don't know who I have number 1. The other one's number 2. Brooks is number 3. I probably have Queen number 4, although I'm not a big fan of his at all. I think that the bust percentage on him is a lot higher. And yes, there are other options not super high on, but if you're looking for someone that you can find for free 99, Davion Taylor of the Eagles. They drafted him in the 3rd round. He has all the athletic upside that you're looking for, and he's free. In almost every league I've seen, he is literally free. From a redraft perspective, Murray 1, Queen 2, Simmons 3, Gay 4, and Brooks at 5. But that's for redraft, and you're not likely looking for rookies for redraft anyways.
Yeah, no, those guys are sitting on the waiver wire. For me, I mean, I think what Kraig said was pretty much spot on. It's kind of a Brooks, Gay, and Murray are kind of the next 3 guys after your top 2. I definitely would throw in. So you mentioned some of those guys. We got to mention Jacob Phillips from the Browns, Logan Wilson from Cincy. I'd even throw, because of what's going on in Jacksonville, I'd throw Caleb Von Chason in there. I know he's a linebacker right now, but I bet they could move him around and do some different things because they're not going to have guys. I mean, they're going to need to put bodies, and he's got a strong athletic profile. I would have just rathered him as kind of a rush the passer D end more than a linebacker, but those are guys that I would keep an eye on. Obviously Zach Bond with the Saints is going to be a guy that'll develop. I mean, and even like a John Greenard and Evan Weaver are guys to keep an eye on. But, again, these are, it's important to know how deep your league is. So if your league isn't super deep, most of these guys are going to be on the waiver, and you can pick them up if they blow up. But, if you have to start multiple linebackers and, you have multiple spots, I mean, it's more of a flexing type league, then some of these guys are rosterable. But most likely they're probably all going to be, on the waiver wire ultimately, I would guess.
And it matters too. We don't talk about this distinction a lot. I know we're going to be in the future more, but if you're looking at a pure linebacker or a league where you have linebackers and edge, I mean, your lists are very different. With that edge position coming into popularity, a lot of these people that we named off wouldn't necessarily fall into that linebacker category. So going forward too, if you guys have specific edge questions for us or the differentiation between the two and how we sort of rank them like that, let us know because it is a significant difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But ultimately, all these names are guys to kind of keep an eye on. Obviously, the top five are kind of the top five, and there's really not a lot of wiggle room other than where you rank the five. All right, so the next question is, I think it actually was again from Rich over on Facebook, but Von Bell. So he's kind of the third safety up in Cincy right now. They have Sean Williams. Um, gosh, I'm drawing a blank. Jesse Bates. Yeah, Jesse Bates, Sean Williams, and now Von Bell. Paul, do you see value in Von Bell? Do you think he'll be successful with Cincinnati?
Once they move on from Williams, I think you're looking at defensive back 10 to 20. I don't think he's going to hit that ceiling that he did in New Orleans. I know it was only last season that I think he was D-back 6 or something.
Yep.
Last year. I don't think he gets that high again, just because I know they're gonna be on the field a lot, but Bates is solid. If they move Williams early, maybe you kick the numbers up, but I think Williams is the odd man out. You don't spend the money that they spent on him to just be like, oh yeah, you're the third safety. Bates isn't leaving the field, and you don't spend that. Or he's 24, Williams is 28 or 9, and on an expiring deal. If he's not moved before week 6, or if Cincinnati, if they have health issues, he stays. If they do not have health issues and he's on the roster by week 8, I would be shocked. Sean Williams, that is. So that's going to open up the field for Bell, who they're not going to sit anyways. I don't see the ceiling, but the floor is there.
What say you, Kraig?
All three of those guys were top 20 defensive backs in the scoring that we've talked about, so something's got to give. And it's probably going to be something for all three of them. I'd be surprised if any one of the three, barring an injury, hits that even mark where they had last year. Having two safeties that high, I mean, you see it more often than you'd probably think. If they're healthy, the Rams have a couple guys that you'd see up there too. So, there's definitely, when you have a situation with not a ton at linebacker and where you're getting thrown on a lot, you can have a team support two very good safeties fantasy-wise, but three is pushing it unless you have something like Paul mentioned a couple weeks ago where they decide, we're going to play you sort of more like a linebacker more often than not. You could get another one on the field then, but at the same time, you have all three guys on the field. They can't all get plays. They're eating into each other. So you're probably looking at a lower floor this year and a lower ceiling. I mean, it's just the nature of having three really talented guys at the same position. They can't all eat at the same time.
Well, and I think, based on the division they're in, I think since he's kind of trying to look at the Chargers blueprint on how to stop, like the Lamar Jacksons of the world, you saw LA in that playoff game a couple years back deploy a ton of safeties. I think they had 3 or 4 on the field at a time trying to limit the run. From an NFL perspective, that's a great idea. From a fantasy perspective, that just, it's becoming like the New England Patriots running back core. You don't know who to start on a week-to-week basis, so you don't start any, and you just look elsewhere.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the direction that I'm taking with Cincy. Is it's like I'm just a little nervous with all these guys. I like Bates' talent. I like Bell's talent. I even like Sean Williams' talent. He's getting older, but he's been a solid safety in fantasy. But ultimately, I either look to trade or look to move or kind of go a different direction with this situation. Now with their young linebackers, I can make a case and I can build the storyline that Von Bell sees the field more because they've got young linebackers that maybe won't learn the scheme quickly and they need kind of veterans out there. But even that, I don't know that it's fantasy relevant. So Von Bell may be a guy that I'm either stashing to see how he develops or I'm trading if somebody's actually going to trade for him, which I doubt that's really going to happen right now.
Yeah.
All right, so Jonathan Abram, where do you guys see him finishing this year if he's healthy? Kraig?
I'm not as high on him as I know Paul is. I mean, if he's healthy, safety wise, they don't have a whole lot else in the secondary there. I think is it Harris is the other one. He might have moved on this offseason.
Yeah,
Joyner.
it's Jamarcus. Yeah, Lamarcus Joyner.
And he's a serviceable pro. There you go, Paul. But he's nothing special. So he's going to be the guy in that secondary you'd want to own if you're going to be owning someone in a straight just defensive back type league. And he's got DB1 upside. I just don't necessarily think he's going to get that this year. Like the guy mentioned, you have to stay healthy, which has been a problem. And with those linebackers that they added, just getting more of those tackles that may have gone by last year, I think that ceiling isn't as high. If he's healthy, probably a mid DB2, low DB1 at best.
What about you, Paul?
They do have Littleton and Kwiatkowski, but Eric Harris was fairly solid from a fantasy perspective. The last, I don't remember how many he played, 6 games, 8 games, 10 games, whatever he played. And Abrams a hitter and a hitter only. He can be had young, fairly cheap, and if we know that he's going to eat a lot, I really like him. And if you're following, getting him young, eating a lot, and you can get him cheap, it's an Albert Fish reference, everybody, and that's your one per show. Where do I think he finishes? I think he finishes anywhere from D-back 5 to 12 to 15 overall. I don't know if he's got the sheer upside just because he's not going to have a lot of interceptions, but they might get a lot of fumbles there also, which he picks up. I just like him more than Kraig just off the athletic profile. And we know he's going to see the field if he's healthy.
Yeah, my concern with him is the injuries. Like you said, he's a hitter. He throws himself at receivers and the players that are coming his way. And I kind of liken him to Lions Tracy Walker, where they're really good hitters. They're also really going to break themselves apart because they're just trying too hard to hurt people. If he's healthy, my guess is probably a DB2, kind of in the 12 to 24 range. I don't see the ceiling just because I don't trust Oakland's defense. I think the tackles will get kind of wrapped up between the linebackers because they're just so good and they're so good at covering sideline to sideline. I just don't know. I don't know how much meat will be left on the bone for guys in the defensive secondary. So Mike, I'm concerned there in some of those instances, and especially because I see teams running on them a lot more because their defensive line is still developing. And depending on how you feel about Farrell and some of these guys, I don't know how strong it's going to be to stop the run. So I'm kind of in the DB2 category for him, and probably about where I'd see him at least this year. But I also don't expect him to stay healthy all year.
So you sort of see him like Bob Sanders was back in the day when you're talking about him and Walker.
Yeah, a big Bob Sanders. Yep. All right, so next up, Derek Brown. Is he good? Will he be good in the short term and the long term? Paul, I'll kick it to you first because I know how much you don't like him.
I thought they wasted a selection on him. I have no clue how they did not select Isaiah Simmons ahead of him. I don't understand it at all. He is I think I didn't have a big board overall, but he probably would have fallen between 25 to 40 overall for me. He's just a limited athlete. If he's someone that you're playing in a defensive tackle specific league, he's got a nice little floor. I don't think he's going to have a lot of sacks that go with it, but you'll have a nice floor at high end DT1, low end low end 1, high end too. He just kind of is what he is. But I thought there were other rookies that were better than he was. I thought Gallimore was better. Blacklock, I thought he was. And these are guys that went in the second round and the third round, and they took him 7th overall. I was not a fan of the pick at all.
Kraig, how about you?
Yeah, he's one of those guys that leading up to the draft, there was a lot of range and where they were talking about him falling. And I was surprised too. I mean, probably not as much as Paul, because, coming from the Devy heavy side of it, he knows more about these guys and has stronger opinions in college of them than I do. But, from leading up to the draft, which is when I do most of my prep on these guys, I didn't see anything that just screamed top-end talent. He was productive, I thought, in college, and he was able to make plays, but one of the concerns was effort for him. And time again, you see effort guys, or guys with effort issues, not make it in the NFL for whatever reason. And I'm not saying he won't, but where they took him, I understand the logic of building up that defense, especially with the new coaching staff. He's going to sort of be able to adapt what he had and what he brought in for the offense, but changing up that defense to be what they want. It's sort of like what we talked about Jacksonville in the big picture of there's going to be a lot of growing pains, and it's probably not a defense you're going to want to have this year. But Brown specifically, I think he could turn out to be fine in a defensive tackle specific league, but long term, he D-lined 3 at best, just because you don't see a whole lot of defensive tackles, making it when you don't have to start a defensive tackle. When you're in that DE-DT combo sort of league, most defensive tackles just aren't going to give you the production where you want them as your 1 or 2. So if you're drafting him in the 4th or 5th round, you're hoping for that, that ceiling that I guess I don't see happening.
Yeah, my biggest concern is the type of defense that Carolina's looking to deploy. They're if you look at all the pundits, they're kind of moving towards a 3-4, and if they do a 3-4, a more traditional 3-4, then I think that's going to ruin his value, because then you're asking him to be a nose tackle in a 3-4 system. He's just eating up space and taking on blockers. He's not really making a lot of things happen behind the line of scrimmage potentially. I just don't see the value play there in the long term, at least. I think if they're spending more time in nickel and he's got a D tackle next to him to help, I think that would be better for him. In defensive tackle specific leagues, he's probably defensive tackle 2, maybe. He's not a guy that I've jumped on. I think in my deepest IDP league, I did put him on my taxi squad just because there wasn't a lot of things to put out there. But that's kind of where I'm at with him. All right, and it looks like we do need to talk about Kinlaw a little bit. Was that you, Paul, that mentioned Kinlaw?
Yeah. If you're having an argument over who to select, just take Kinlaw. Would you rather have the guy who's in a 3-4 who doesn't have? I know that Burns and YTG are edge, but they're not really line help. Would you rather have the guy who's in a 3-4 who doesn't have solid 3-4 ends, or would you rather have the guy who's in a 4-3 who can push up the field and is the 3rd best guy on his own team with Eric Armstead and Bosa? He's going to see a lot of single coverage there. He's pretty clearly over Brown, unless you're playing like a super tackle-heavy format. He's pretty clearly ahead for me.
I think it'll be interesting. The Panthers have specifically been evasive, I think, on their defense of what they're doing. the most recent stuff from their defensive coach said that they're not going to deploy just one front. They're going to be more of a multitude of fronts. So, what sort of playing time Brown gets in what position and who he has around him will go a long way to seeing what sort of value he has. Like you guys said, if he's in a 3-4 right now, I don't think he really fits that very well, and most of the time those guys aren't the most productive. But if he does be one of the 2D tackles in a 4-3, if you have YTG or YGT, my acronyms are off here. Brian Burns has looked really good, and I think he showed a lot of promise. I'm probably actually higher on Brian Burns than Paul somehow, which is odd considering he's a Florida State guy. But if those guys can grow and take all that next step together in a couple of years, I mean, that defensive line could just be hard to defend against, period. And because then you're picking your poison, which will lead to more opportunities for Brown. So I think as that sort of defense goes and grows, that'll tell you where his upside is and how high it is.
For sure. All right, so Jaws is asking on YouTube, keeping D-Law and Mack at edge, need to cut one or two of Fowler, Everson Griffin, or Brian Burns. That new position designation on Flea Flicker makes me think of getting more of the LB type of edge guys. So really kind of just a one question with a comment. So are you keeping Fowler, Griffin, Brian Burns? Which one or two would you keep? Kind of what's your order? What's 1, 2, and 3 in your mind of keepable guys?
Griffin's out. Griffin's the guy you're releasing. I'm just not a Burns fan. He's a one-trick pony. For me,
That's a
he
good
has
trick.
been. Yeah. He's been that way since he's been in high school. Unfortunately, yes, I did scout him when he was in high school. But I can't do it. I can't pick a Florida Gator or Burns. I can't. I just can't let the. It's probably fairly even there between Fowler and Burns, but my ego is not going to let me pick the guy who played at Florida.
I'm taking Burns as far as keeping with those two. I'm keeping Burns first. And then, to me, it's a toss-up between the other two because Griffin, I think, is long-term. I don't even know if I'd say that's true. I mean, it's very possible that Fowler and Griffin are in the league the same amount of time left here. Griffin's just more of a consummate professional than Fowler has been consistently throughout his career in terms of production. The only thing that, and take of this what you will, having two defensive end edge type guys, if you're having Griffin, I know it's a 1-year deal, but him and Lawrence, I wouldn't feel great starting both of them. If you have to, if something happens to Mac, you're starting Mac every week that he's out there. And maybe that's the Cowboy pessimist in me that's been there for the past 15 years or whatever it's been. But I'd have a hard time starting Griffin and Lawrence together. I mean, to me, it's Burns pretty easily, and then a coin flip with what you like more of the other two. Griffin will do more for you this year. So if you're thinking I'm going to keep him 1 year and then do something else next year, I guess I'd go Griffin because then it's only 2 out of 4 as opposed to 2 out of 3. But Fowler, the 1-year production, as Shania Twain said, that don't impress me much.
Really? That just happened.
Wow.
Bam,
we got to balance out the
bam,
reference.
Bam, bam, bam. Yeah, I don't know about that. Burns is who I'm keeping. And the other two, I mean, Fowler I used last year. I picked him up and I was playing him on a weekly basis because he was productive. Moving to Atlanta, I don't know that was helpful for his value because they'll wind up putting him more as a hand in the dirt guy, and I don't know if he can be successful doing that as much as he was in what he was deployed in LA's defense. So, and ultimately, you guys should be doing movie references, not all this other nonsense y'all are doing. Movie references.
My background, that's what the movie references for, Brad.
You asked about our personal lives. Here it goes. You asked for it.
And, like you said, my thing with Fowler, though, is that like you said, it was 1 year last year, and it was all big plays. If you're looking for any sort of consistency, I don't know how you trust him. Even when he was in Jacksonville, he'd have weeks where he gets you half a point, 1 point, and then he goes off and gets 2 sacks and 2 tackles for a loss, and maybe he wins you the week. But if he disappears 3 out of every 4 weeks, I don't know how you're trusting to have that guy. To me, I can't. But
Right.
maybe
Absolutely.
he turned it around. I don't think so, but maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. That would be a tough one for me to think he really did.
He hasn't been smart since he's been in high school. And yes, I scouted him when he was in high school. He's been an idiot since he's been in high school.
Is this in-person scouting or film scouting?
Don't answer that question. All right, so final question. Which IDP positions are you looking to load up on and make sure you have an extra stash of? Kind of vague question, but I think it can be kind of universal even if you're in leagues that start corners and D tackles and some of that, because I think it's kind of universal the importance of certain positions. Paul, we'll start with you.
Load up on. I'm gonna make sure that I get one of the top 3 or 4 defensive ends. I'm gonna make sure I get a safety, and then I'm going to quote unquote load up on extra linebackers at the end, because I feel that they're easier to find good backers. You're not just going to sit there and find a guy who gets 14 sacks off the waiver wire. I can find someone off the waiver wire who's going to get me 110 tackles comboed up. I feel I can find that, so I'm going to quote unquote load up on backers. I'm assuming this is a line backs and linebackers specific, but I'm going to load up on those middle backers.
What about you, Kraig?
I would be loading up and like stashing players at positions, kind of like Paul said, where it's harder to find a really good guy. And for me, historically, that's been defensive ends, defensive tackles. If you're doing DT specific, I'm going to be finding a guy like last year, someone like Jeffrey Simmons at the end of a draft, and stashing him because the guy's got all the potential in the world, and he's not going to, come out guns blazing the first year, even if he was healthy. In the position that he was in, I don't think he was just going to come out and be immediately fantasy relevant. Those guys generally take more time to come along. Even someone like Danielle Hunter, he was a later draft pick. He had to learn the game, and then he gets a chance to start, and he's able to come through. So those sort of positions, if you're talking about, there's cornerbacks. Paul's advocated this from the start. You can find a cornerback off the waiver wire once the season gets going. I wouldn't be investing in that long term, because the guys that are really good for you probably aren't really good year in and year out. Safeties and linebackers, I feel that I can generally find more of later, so I'd probably wait to take them in a draft, and I would have more of them because I'm kind of going with dart throws. Like, all right, here's 5 guys that I think are going to pan out and be good. If I get 1 or 2 of them that are really good, well, it's worked for me. But the positions that I really feel that I want to stash guys at are those probably defensive line positions where you're going to have to find a talent you like and hold on to him until he gets that playing time to pan out, because most guys on the D line just aren't going to come out and be amazing the first couple of years.
Right. Yeah, for me, I like to try to, and thinking of the different leagues I have and trying to kind of come with this universal truth, I try to store a guy at each position, at each level, I should say. So either a DN, D tackle, if I'm in a specific league that uses that, a linebacker, and a safety of some sort, and typically I look for guys that, like you guys said, could take some time to develop, have the traits or skills that I really think could become really, really nice at some point fantasy wise. But yeah, I try to get a D end, try to get extra linebacker, try to get a safety. Depending on how the league flows and what extra values are there, sometimes that becomes multiple linebackers or multiple safeties based on kind of the value. The year that John Johnson came out in the draft, I think I had loaded up on 2 or 3 safeties because I liked the safety group. Wound up flipping all of them but Johnson, and Johnson kind of became the guy I started using a year or two later. So, it kind of varies based on obviously your league size, but universally, I try to hit it all 3 levels because there's always going to be need to have that next guy up because NFL is not for long. So, and we know that eventually those guys stop having value, and it tends to be quicker on the defensive side. I feel like I'm churning my defensive roster quite regularly. It seems like these days. So, that being said, that's it. All the questions are answered. Thank you guys over on YouTube and on Facebook for pumping us with some questions. Always keep them coming. You can find us over in the Facebook community. Paul's over there. He's an admin and heavily involved in Facebook. Kraig and I are both on Twitter. You can see our handles below every